A few announcements before we begin. If you've not turned in your leadership forms, please get those turned in to a member of staff as soon as you can, and there are additional forms located in the back of the auditorium if you need one. Also, if you're interested in teaching adult Bible classes on Wednesday night, please speak with Chris Van Winkle. He's trying to work ahead on a curriculum. Thank you. Remember, we've got a wedding shower coming up for Anna Snyder and Austin Hawley on Sunday the 19th, and they're registered at Target and Amazon. And that will be at the home of Allison Penrod from 1:30 to 3 o'clock. If you brought food for the funeral service today and you hadn't picked your dishes up, please, they're out in the activity center. Please pick those up as soon as you can, please. And everybody did an outstanding job. There was more than enough food for Ann's family, and so that was great. Summers Avenue did the job this week. It was great. Also, we don't have any updates on any sick folks that I am aware of. Anyway, we need to remember Lovell Davis, Gail Jenkins, Joel Gray, and Gil, and Sue Myatt and Sue Simmons. Anybody who's had family and long-term health issues knows how lonely it can get. So visits and checking in on them would be much appreciated. Oh, thank you, David. Men's breakfast in the morning. Yes, sir. So ladies, kick that man out of the house and get the house to yourself for a little while. 6:30. You can do it, Ernest. You can do it. You want me to call you in the morning when I get up? You want me to call you in the morning when I get up? You won't answer, but I can call you, huh? Okay. All right, there you go. We'll throw in an extra biscuit for you, Ernest. Okay. All righty. This week we will be talking about kings and rulers and masters and servants, mostly about kings and rulers and their relationship with their subjects. That's the word. I love this quote from King George III, and those from you history buffs know that he was the king during the American Revolution, and he said, basically, if you didn't agree with him, you're a traitor and a scoundrel. And kings are just a foreign idea to us here in the United States. We didn't have a king. We had a rebellion because there was a king, and that was King George III, and we didn't like having a king. And we're kind of a rebellious sort, I guess you might say. And so when Solomon's talking about this, one of the things I just feel like I have to remind myself and in any class, we're not used to kings. And the kingship that Solomon is talking about occurred under the Old Covenant, different covenant than what we have. Israel was a chosen nation. It was God's people. The purpose of them was to preserve the genealogy of David, to bring forth the Christ. And so there is not a chosen nation today. And sometimes I can fall into that sometimes myself. And so we are servants in a spiritual kingdom. When Jesus was before Pilate, John 18:36, he very plainly said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And he goes on to say, "If it were, my servants would fight so that I would not be handed over." He was the king of a spiritual kingdom. When Gabriel appeared to Mary to give her the news that she would bear Jesus, she said, "You're going to bear someone," and if you look in Luke chapter 1, who will sit on David's throne. He would inherit that throne, but it was a spiritual throne, and we have to keep that in mind. So when Solomon is talking about some of these things. Remember, it's a different covenant, different set of rules. We work and we serve in a spiritual kingdom. We are Abraham's descendants. We are his heirs, as Paul pointed out in Galatians 3:27. You are baptized into Christ. You have clothed yourself with Christ. There's neither Jew nor Greek, emphasizing that no particular race. There's neither slave nor free man. There's neither male nor female. You are all one in Christ. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants. That's us. We are receiving that blessing that Abraham was given, that through his seed, all nations would be blessed. And you can see that original promise that God made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 and re-emphasized in Genesis 15. For us, the church is the kingdom. That is the kingdom and Jesus is our king. Ephesians 3, so that the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known through the church. It's through the church, not any particular nation. For all rulers, and goes on to say all rulers and authorities. However, one principle that Solomon did state about nation is in Proverbs 14:34, righteousness exalts a nation. And yes, righteousness will exalt any people who choose to live righteously. And that is certainly a principle that we can adhere to and approve. For us, as we think about as a spiritual nation serving a king who is at God's right hand now, as Stephen saw in Acts chapter 7, saw him standing at God's right hand. We serve, but we have instructions as far as our relationship to the earthly kingdoms that we live in. And Paul stated that very plainly in Romans chapter 13. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, and he goes on and talks about that a little bit. So we need to keep those things in mind, that so many of these things, as far as that being a king and a kingdom that is set aside separate from other kingdoms, is the old covenant. And so, but the principles about our relationship to people in power, our political leaders that we elect, and I would say that even our relationship with people in high authority positions. I worked in a large organization. There were 10,000 people in there. We had a CEO, we had vice presidents, and there was a way that I, as a Christian, should relate to them and respect their position. You guys that are in the military know very well, base commander, he's the man, he's in charge. And you understand that, even section heads. Now, just as a sideline, if you want some personal reading and meditation on the Christian's relationship with the government, Danny Dodd at Levy has written an excellent book where he discusses the relationship that a Christian should have towards their government. Danny Dodd. Danny, D-A-N-N-Y, Dodd. Yes. And if you get with me after, I've got a piece of paper with his contact email. It's my copy was $5. I think we can all spend $5 on a little book. And anyway, he discusses it if you want some discussion and thoughts from someone who I consider has done a good job studying. And also way back, David Lipscomb wrote a book on civil government that you can get from Amazon. So anyway, kings. And again, I would say as we think about how this applies to us, think about our relationship to people in power, all levels, all kinds of power. There are very few of us that are going to be a CEO. There are very few of us that are going to be a base commander or a naval commander or captain of a ship. And but we all have relationships with people who have positions of authority over us. I think there's some principles there that we can look at. And then for if any of us have been in positions of power, authority, where we have the authority or the ability to make decisions that impact other people, we could certainly take some of these principles that Solomon talks about here. So, first I want to talk about the wicked king. We'll start out with the negative and go towards the positive. And on your handout, and again, we've got several people online, and so if you ask questions, make comments, I'll try to repeat those so that they can get everything that we're getting here. So Proverbs 16:12, for it is an abomination for kings to commit wicked acts, for a throne is established in righteousness. And then 28:15, like a roaring lion and a rushing bear is a wicked ruler over a poor people. When the righteous increase, the people rejoice. When a wicked man rules, the people groan. And 29:12, if a ruler pays attention to falsehood, all his ministers become wicked. So when you think about a department or your squad of men, if you're in the military or your whatever division, there's multiple divisions in the military. There's multiple, when I was working at Baptist Health, there were hundreds of departments across the system. When you think about that, when you've got someone in charge of something and they are a wicked person, what happens to that group of people, that group of men and women, that department, that nation, that whatever spin you want, what happens to the people who are serving that person? What happens to them? They suffer. How do they suffer, George?
Well, they're forced to do things they don't want to do, which in turn affects the whole organization.
Okay. They're forced into decisions or things that they would rather not do. And of course, for us as a Christian, we know that there's some lines we can't cross. And I'm sure any of us who have been an employee or a soldier or whatever looked and said, I really wish you wouldn't do that, sir. I don't think it's a great idea, but we know it's their say. It's their say, and we know that. But when you've got someone who's in charge, who is a wicked person, everybody is going to suffer. If it's a business, customer service will suffer. Customers will say, they vote with their feet. They go to the next store if it works out that way. So business owners, have to consider their impact on that. I've always felt like that rulers or people who are in charge of different organizations, whatever that may be, they tend to collect people around them who are like them. Do you agree or not? Want to agree? Do you agree? Yeah. Okay, John, come on.
About 40 years ago, I met a man. He was a billionaire. Probably the only billionaire except for Larry Curtis that I've ever met.
Well, he's trying to keep it quiet on the down low.
And he constantly tried to tell us chucklehead managers we needed to be servant leaders. That's a concept that we really couldn't understand because we felt like we needed to be that strong arm.
Right.
Do as I say, my way or the highway. But he also said, hire people better than you. Hire people with better qualities or different qualities that can make you better.
Yes. And I agree. And as an effective leader, that's what he ought to do. Some of you have heard the phrase, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. Because you got to bring people on that have skill sets and are smarter. Melba, did you want to say something? Was that?
No, I just said that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I would say, someone like that who is, I'm assuming he was an effective leader. Oh, well, he has been successful, or was in his day, yes. Yes. And, yeah. Anyway, Effective leaders will do that. But wicked leaders, or leaders that don't have those kind of principles, people tend to migrate to them that share their process. Now, I totally agree with you. I was very lucky. I worked for a vice president for 20-something years. Great guy, and he told me he always tried to have someone on his team that he knew would disagree with him. That ain't an easy job. But any of you know nurses, like I'm a nurse, you can find that. But he wanted someone he knew would call him out or disagree with him to bounce things off of. And I appreciated him for that. So I always felt comfortable when I could go to him and say, really, would you like reconsider this? Because I knew he wasn't going to take my head off or fire me. I don't know which would be worse. But anyway, so yes. All right. Now, just as a reminder, was it God's plan to have a king? No, it wasn't. And if you remember when Samuel was having his issues with the children of Israel in 1 Samuel 8, God told him, who had they rejected? They had rejected God, not Samuel, yes. And so it wasn't his original plan. Now, this is off topic. It always blows me away. God always intended for the priesthood to rule, but he always knew that Christ was going to be a king, and he was going to come from the lineage of David, a king. One principle in prophecy is just because God knows something is going to happen doesn't mean he made it happen. Does that make sense? God knew the people were going to do things. And if you read Deuteronomy, especially 28:29, I mean, he said, this is what's going to happen. And what he told Samuel is, in verse 18 of chapter 8, after they get a king, says, the people they're going to cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So you picked your poison, so you're going to live with it. And, there was times that God did say that to his people. Jeremiah was another one that said, don't pray for them, don't offer a sacrifice for them. I don't want to hear it. He was done. And there's times that God made those decisions. Now, was Solomon always faithful? Sadly, no. He started out faithful. If we read in chapter 3 of 1 Kings, he made wise decisions. He prayed and asked for wisdom, and God gave him wisdom and wealth. But just a few chapters later, in chapter 11, we see how he was led astray by all of his foreign wives. So anyway, a righteous king next. Proverb. Now, sometimes it's kind of difficult to divide these out because the same proverb could be taken both ways. Proverbs 20 verse 8, a king who sits on the throne of justice disperses all evil with his eyes. Chapter 20 verse 26 and 28, a wise king winnows the wicked and drives the threshing wheel over them. 28, loyalty and truth preserve the king and upholds his throne by righteousness. 28:16, a leader who is a great oppressor lacks understanding, but he who hates unjust gain will prolong his days. And 29:4, the king who gives stability to the land by justice, but a man who takes bribes overthrows it. I don't want to get political. I just want to quote this guy who was a politician, previous governor Asa Hutchinson. One of the speeches he was given during COVID was, he said, we can legislate all these things, but he said, you can't make people do stuff they don't want to do. And he gave the example of seat belts. It was mandated for people to wear seatbelts long before people got in the habit of doing it. He said it's an educational process you have to work through, and okay, you legislate it, but if people refuse to do things, he said you can't run all over the country making them do it. You just can't do that. But anyway, he was as most of you know, he had a that's another example. Yes. Correct. That's correct. That example of Judas is a great example. In fact, when Jesus named his 12, he said, "In one of you," he knew, but he didn't make him. That's a great example. Now, as I mentioned that early on, Solomon was wise and just. So justice, just the concept of justice, how does that provide stability to a nation or to a department or to a business? If the owner of a business makes his decisions in a just manner, in a righteous manner, or a department head or a CEO or vice president, how does someone who makes decisions based on what's just and right, how does that provide stability to that organization, whatever it is, country, department, whatever? How does, Debbie?
Each one of these are treated fairly, evaluated fairly, and if there's no bias or this did, no man takes a bribe, or, the teacher's pet, or however way you want to say it, and they will work for that leader, for that person who makes the decision, even if there are harsh decisions. If everyone's treated the same or fairly, it goes a long ways in keeping
Yes. And if people, I'll get to you in just a second, Melba. If people feel like the decisions are made in that manner, they can tolerate difficult. You reminded me, there was a Marine commander who was retiring, and he said, well, was there favoritism in the Marines? He said, no, they treated us all bad. So, Melba, what'd you? Yes, it is. Sometimes just make a decision. Yes, this is true. This is true.
Tommy, it's the law and order of business. People will work for something that they understand. The boss says, these are the rules, everybody abides by them, and then everyone follows the rules, things will fall in line.
Even if the rules aren't very much fun. Yeah. Vanessa, did you have your hand up? You've got an opinion, right? Yes. Correct. Correct. I like that. Yes. If people know what to expect, even if bad decisions are made, and they're consistent to everyone, and like you mentioned, you can't always do everybody exactly the same. Sometimes you have to consider that person's situation, what's going on with them, and the particular needs of the organization too. Sometimes, but as long as people understand that they are making decisions in a just and fair manner, that it's much more acceptable. So, I've already basically said this. My next question was, does justice provide stability in business? Yes, it does. If a business owner is consistent with the employees in his business. They know what to expect. They know what to say to customers. And so it provides a stable business environment, and that business is going to do better than one it's so much inconsistency. So how does bribery change that equation? I believe it does, and things are unfair, but what then are decisions based on? Who can pay the bribe? Who's got more money? Yes, and so we probably all have our personal examples of things like that, or friends. A friend gets a better decision, maybe in legal matters, whatever it is, based on friendship. I love spy novels. Some of you do too. I love all those. But one of the favorite tricks that spies used was the honey trap, right? And you get someone in a compromising position and you influence their decisions. Bribery is not always with money. And so it tears up the equation. So then no one knows they probably do know what to expect, because if the guy with the big checkbook goes to the CEO's office, you pretty well know what the decision's going to be, whatever that guy wanted. But it makes people realize it's not fair and it's not right. And so it does lend some instability. You see this sometimes in large corporations, the board of trustees. People don't necessarily want to be on the board of trustees for all that extra work. They want the influence within that organization. And you may have seen this or may not, but that's how people gain influence over an organization, is they get on the board of trustees. And so then they can influence decisions that way. I have a personal example, but I'm not going to use it. Probably wouldn't be appropriate. But, all right, the king should listen. And this is important. We've kind of alluded to this just a little bit about the importance of listening. The importance of listening to the right source is important too. Where there is no guidance, people fall, but in abundance of counselors there is victory. Take away the wicked before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. So there's a contrast there. If there's influence for the king righteously, there'll be good decisions, and if wickedly, there'll be poor decisions. Now, what is group think? Exactly. It's just whatever, some people read the room, don't they? See where it's going. Okay, I'm going to vote for the majority. Wars have been caused by this. Very poor decisions get caused by groupthink. Hence why I had so much respect for my boss, who purposely wanted someone who would push back against decisions he was going. So if a leader has accumulated wicked people around them, is he going to get good advice? I mean, this is a dumb question, but I just want to repeat it. Is he going to get good advice? Depends on if you want to go down that wicked trail or not, right? What were you going to say, Lynetta? Were you going to say something? Oh, okay, sorry. I wasn't trying to pick on you. All right, here's kind of my favorite section. Don't irritate the king. In this day and time that Solomon's operating under, the king was unlimited in his power. Very few people. And if you did, it's like King George III. If you disagree with me, you're a scoundrel and a traitor. And we know what happened to traitors, especially in this day and time. The king's favor is toward a servant who acts wisely, but his anger toward him who acts shamefully. The fury of a king is like the messenger of death, but a wise man will appease it. In the light of a king's face is life. In his favor is like a cloud with spring rain. The king's wrath is like the roaring lion, but his favor is like the dew on the grass. The terror of the king is like the growling of a lion. He who provokes him to anger forfeits his own life. This is where you have a king or a leader or whoever. It's my way or the highway, correct? You're going to do it my way, regardless, period. Decision is over. And we know that department heads, CEOs, all, there has to be someone who has the final say. We know that. But you don't execute or fire or punish the person who doesn't necessarily agree. But I think the wisdom here that he kind of hints at a little bit is to be careful. Just be careful. Now, when I first got into management, just a few days ago, went to a management course by the personnel director, the vice president of personnel, to teach us young managers how not to get fired, really, in a lot of ways. Don't be stupid. One of the things he said, boys and girls, the lion of the jungle roars when he wants to. And when he does, all you little monkeys need to get up in the tree and stay there until he's through. And we've all probably been, if we've been in any kind of organization at all, we've all been there when the guy in charge or the woman in charge is having a fit. That is not the time to get yourself in the middle of that. Get up in the tree with the rest of the little monkeys and stay there. That was some very sage advice. John, you've been there, sounds like. Yes. And it didn't bother me at all to be called a little monkey, because it came in handy. There are times that it's not appropriate to confront leadership. Now, a few years ago it was a fad, speak truth to power. It was a good way to find new employment sometimes based on where you were and how you did that. Some people were okay with that, a lot were not. So often people would use it as an excuse to start an argument. But I think the lesson in this section is pick your battles, pick your times, pick how you approach, and there's a way to approach. It's no different with your spouse or your close family. You don't walk in and say, that was the stupidest thing I have ever seen anybody do. If you do that, your resume needs to be up to date, right? Needs to be polished and ready. And then the next section is speaking truth to the king. And there's that delicate balance. And you think about someone who has unlimited power like the king, you had to be real careful with that. In this particular case, I really thought of Daniel. He's one of my favorite Bible characters. He was just a kid when he was taken to Babylon. But if you read the times that there was some, you might say, confrontation, he was always very respectful in how he approached power and how he dealt with them on what he was going to eat, what he was going to worship. He was always respectful to the person in charge. Debbie? Yes. Yes. And, you reminded me, the last chapter of 2 Samuel, when Saul was executed. And the next chapter, was that 1 Kings, when the guy said, oh yeah, I'm the one that did it. I'm the one that killed him. And what did David do? You had no right to kill the Lord's anointed. Because David, and no matter how bad it was, yes, good example. Good example.
I find it interesting, we've got so many ways to do it. The way to make it right is to speak the truth.
Yes. And again, to me, I kind of put these side by side because there is a way to speak truth to power. There is a way. And if sometimes we might find ourselves in a situation where you can't. The leader that you report to, you just can't. And it's a tough situation, and you really end up having to make a decision. Do I need to stay in this particular situation? If I can't answer truthfully or speak truthfully or bring something up, then the company is probably doomed. So anyway, and going along with this, knowing your place. There is powerful people, and there are people who don't have a lot of power. Proverbs 25, verse 6, do not claim honor in the presence of the king, and do not stand in the place of great men, for it is better to be said to you, come up here, than for you to be placed lower in the presence of the prince whom your eyes have seen. Now, Petrillo in Truth for Today commentary felt like that this was talking about like couriers who is an example that they brought messages and they were in the presence of the king and the princes and I'm sure princesses too, but in front of powerful men, and he would be with them a lot. And he said he felt like this was someone who was beginning to think a little more of themselves than they really should. When the king just says, all I want is your message. Just give me the message. I don't need a lot of commentary. And so he felt like that was this kind of situation. He felt like he continued on in his comment that he may have a higher view of himself. What New Testament example can you think of immediately in Jesus' teaching that really talks about this very thing? Exactly. In Luke 14, it says it would be better for the person in charge of the feast, oh, you can't sit way down here, you need to come on up here to the head table. It's that attitude that Solomon is teaching, that Jesus was teaching about not thinking better of ourselves. I know a lot of people believe in tooting your own horn and shining your own star and things like that. But it's much better if a person is recognized based on merit in what other people see in them. And so he's saying, don't just step up there because he is the king and you are not. And so anyway, just a brief section on masters and servants. There wasn't necessarily a whole lot that said, use the term master particularly, but I also think that it's the same thing, it's the same principle with kings and their subjects in many ways. But in the few verses that I picked out for that, he who troubles his own house will inherit the wind, and the foolish will be servant to the wise-hearted. And 12:9, better is he who is lightly esteemed and has a servant than he who honors himself and lacks bread. I love that one. A servant in 17:2, a servant who acts wisely will rule over a son who acts shamefully and will share in the inheritance among the brothers. On 12:9, better is he who is lightly esteemed and has a servant than he who honors himself and lacks bread. Have you ever seen examples of that people are always playing the big shot, but they got nothing? And Chris is not here, I'd pick on him. I had a friend that worked in the banking business. She said there was a guy came in and he looked like he got his clothes off the trash heap behind Goodwill. But the guy was a multimillionaire, but you'd never know it talking to him and the way that he dressed. His clothes didn't fit, they were tight, and but she would talk about having people come in that acted like they were somebody and they had $49.50 in their checking account. Not elevating ourselves beyond what we really are is I think, a lesson there. And sometimes it behooves us to be pay very close attention to the people we're around and how they are and what they really are about, and recognize signs and symptoms of what they really are. There's probably people in your neighborhood, there's people in my neighborhood, and I'm sitting there going, I know what you paid for that house because everything's online anymore. They've got 4 or 5 brand new vehicles, and one guy down the street just bought a trailer that must cost $400,000. It's one of those fifth wheels, and I'm sitting there going, how much debt, how much debt can you afford to do all this? And is it about show, or is it just about, what is it about? I don't know. And again, this goes back to this pride in this thing and living within means. And is the bank going to be calling him up saying, I'm sending someone to pick up all that stuff you got there? So anyway, 17:2 is interesting. A servant who acts wisely will rule over a son who acts shamefully. Doesn't always work out that way, but many times it should work out that way, that the servant who has shown themselves to be trustworthy and honest and works hard, to me, the other counterpart to that is, just because daddy's got all that doesn't mean it's going to be yours if you act a fool. Just to put it in plain old English, you can't assume. I don't know if it's true. Bill Gates has said he's not giving any of his kids any inheritance. I've seen that 2 or 3 places. It's hard to tell if something on the internet and in the news is true. It's so easy to fake things, but he says they got to earn it. I earned it, they got to earn it. He's given his money to charity, how many $100 billion he's got. I don't know if that's true or not. But that principle, I've seen that play out in other places where someone says, "No, my kids, they gotta earn it." But anyway, so we've discussed all these principles and things about the relationships with those in power, and remember that the kings in those times were pretty much unrestrained. There are some people today in positions of power who think they are unrestrained until they're not. And so we probably all have our personal examples of that. But Solomon is revealing how a monarch should act and how subjects should interact with the monarch. And so the example for us is how people in power should act and how people who are subjects, employees, or participants in that organization, how they should interact with that person. It includes, like we've already said, just summarizing, political leaders, department managers, business owners, anyone who is in authority. So anyway, lesson is yours. Is there any other comment that anyone would like to throw on the fire before I put it out? I appreciate the comments. Been some great comments. I appreciate it very much. Next week is going to be a hodgepodge of different parables. Proverbs: hope, joy, fear, sorrow, justice, knowledge, honesty, and just all kinds. So it's just everything, just all in there. So we ought to have some fun. And again, I appreciate the comments, and so I'll dismiss everyone.